Hi everyone, welcome back to our English revision channel. This week we will be looking at Beatrice Garland's poem Kamikaze. Please ensure you have your pen, your flashcards or your revision sheets ready to complete as we go through the video. So let's start with a bit of information about Beatrice Garland herself. Garland has said that poets such as John Clare and Seamus Heaney are some of her writing inspirations, and she's won many prizes for her poetry. When she wrote Kamikaze, she was inspired by the motivations people have to want to die for their country. Garland's poem reflects the immense social pressure that these kamikaze pilots had to carry out during these missions. Whilst we may think of this poem as only relating to World War II, it is very much one that relates to the many contemporary conflicts that we see today. So let's look at kamikaze pilots. During World War II, Japanese soldiers and pilots were taught that these suicide missions were the only way to change the direction of the war, as Japan was losing. It was crucial that soldiers took part in this last resort. Very well trained pilots would volunteer for these missions, but towards the end of the war, the military would have to recruit people and shunned those that refused. There is a very clear link to the power of nature throughout this poem, with the pilots being named Kamikaze or Divine Wind, following a typhoon that threatened to wipe out enemy ships in the 13th century. Japanese culture was very honor based, with people being taught that one person's dishonor would stain their whole family. This is something we see throughout Garland's poem. This culture emphasized the importance of how being brave and honorable came before anything else. So, what is Garland's poem about? This poem is taken from the collection entitled The Invention of Fireworks, published in 2014. This collection of poems explored life and death within the natural world. Garland explores human turbulence and how we should seek solace in the power of nature, as a reminder that an otherwise bleak life still possesses beauty. Her poetry also investigates how, in the 20th century, mankind becomes a threat not just to nature, but to itself as well. It's also very important to remember that Kamikaze is a poem that is littered with the power of nature and how this is able to affect even the most indoctrinated of minds. Let's consider how Garland structures her poem. Kamikaze is a narrative poem. It begins as an account of a conversation that may have been overheard or told by someone else. Sections of the poem are presented in italics as first-person narrative, where the storyteller speaks directly of her own thoughts and feelings. This has the effect of heightening the sense of sadness. The poem is written in 7 stanzas, each sestet, or 6 lines. There is also no regular rhythmic pattern. It is mostly written in third person, as we hear the experiences of the pilot as if we are hearing a story that has been told over and over again. The poet also changes to first person, and we hear the perspective of the pilot's daughter and her sadness over the fate of her father. There is one notable feature of this poem. There are only 3 sentences, and it only contains 3 full stops. This perhaps reflects the telling of the story verbally. The first sentence runs over the first 5 stanzas as we learn about the pilot's memories in vivid detail. We are therefore given a lot of detail which allows us to imagine more exactly the circumstances of the pilot's difficult decision. The second sentence marks a shift in time and in speaker. We hear from the daughter's perspective directly. Until this point, her story was retold in third-person narrative, creating a sort of distancing effect. Now, the reader is suddenly brought closer to someone with a direct interest in the story she tells, speaking it at a much later time. This new sentence also contains a surprise. It is in this sentence that we learn that the pilot actually abandoned his mission and turned back. Placing the information at this point of the poem gives a lot of impact as we realise the difficult choice the pilot has had to make. The final sentence is only 3 lines and reverts back to third person. It adds another surprise, emphasising the fact that the pilot may have thought he would have been better off dying in the suicide mission. Each change in speaker and each shift in time has a jarring and unsettling effect on the reader, and perhaps expresses the turbulent but repressed feelings of the daughter. So let's move on to some language analysis. Garland begins her poem with the description of the father embarking on his journey. Embarked means to begin something. This suggests that the pilot is beginning a new journey and is about to make the ultimate sacrifice. He is giving his life for his country. Could this also, however, reflect the fact that he is a tool of the government and is mindlessly embarking on this mission because he has been brainwashed? Again, we see more of the power of propaganda in the line, a shaven head full of powerful incantations. The pilot appears to be committed to his country as he begins this journey. The noun incantations also gives us the idea that the pilot is powerless to the indoctrination of propaganda. He seems to be acting as if he is a puppet, as if he does not have any free will. He is completely under the spell of patriotism as he climbs aboard his plane. The final line, and enough fuel for a one-way journey into history, features some painful irony. There is a sense that he is about to die and therefore will be commemorated, but he will also be honoured and celebrated by his family for completing this mission. As he turns back, his journey is framed with dishonour, abandonment, and shame. There is enjambment used between stanza 1 and stanza 2, which signals the change by creating a dramatic pause. The volta here signifies a shift in the tone as the pilot makes an abrupt decision. The use of the word but is hard-hitting, as if the pilot has abruptly awoken from his spell. The use of the simile, strung out like bunting on a green-blue translucent sea, also gives us the impression of a celebration. Is this a celebration of the pilot's mission and his family's pride? Or is it the pilot's own celebration of his life and his desire to stay alive? The adjectives of green and blue also create a sense of serenity, again highlighting the beauty of nature and the fact that the pilot will be denying himself of this pleasure if he continues with this mission. The adjective translucent implies a moment of clarity for the pilot. He perhaps realizes that he cannot complete his mission, as if he has snapped out of the spell he was under. The spell seems to have been broken as he begins to value the beauty of nature and the most simple of memories. Stanza 3 features the metaphor of the shoals of fishes, which can be interpreted in many different ways. Dark has connotations of death and also contrasts between the sun and the dark, which suggests the pilot in a turmoil. The repetitive use of sibilants also links to the idea of the pilot being put under a spell in the incantations he repeats to himself in stanza 1. There is also a sense of hushed tones here, as if the pilot realizes the danger of the decision he is about to make. He recognizes the dishonour that will come along with abandoning this mission. There is also a clear sense of the power and majesty of nature in this line, as Garland uses the word silver, a precious metal. Finally, the idea that the fishes show their bellies represents the idea of death. Perhaps this signifies the pilot's desire to live and avoid an early death. He purposely chooses to live his life. Could this also represent the motion of the plane as the pilot heads towards the mission? This could have given him a much better view of nature surrounding him, further encouraging him to choose to live his life. There is more enjambment as we move from stanza 3 to stanza 4, which further signifies the use of storytelling throughout the poem. This stanza focuses on the importance of memories as the pilot seems to be drawn back to his childhood. He thinks of his brothers and his father and their lives together. In this stanza we see that he built cairns of pale grey pebbles. A cairn was made up of pebbles to mark a grave. This is a metaphor that displays the frail but beautiful memories of childhood as the pilot realizes the consequences of death. He will no longer be able to enjoy the beauty of nature and will not be able to build memories with his own children. The description of the breakers further adds to this idea that his mind is slowing down and his consciousness is going against the indoctrination. It is interesting that in stanza 5 the biggest threat appears to be a tuna fish. Garland focuses on the power of nature here, perhaps emphasizing the imbalance between man and nature. However, could this symbolize the power of propaganda and the effect it had on the kamikaze pilots? By describing the tuna as a prince, Garland could be signifying the prominent position that kamikaze pilots had in society. Their elevated status put immense pressure on these soldiers and the strong feelings of obligation. Perhaps the description of the tuna as muscular could also represent the power and strength propaganda had on the minds of young boys. They were essentially controlled and indoctrinated to consider this an honor and duty to die for their country. Finally, by ending the first sentence using the adjective dangerous, Garland highlights the danger that awaits the pilot. Despite the indoctrination, the pilot realizes he has been coerced and decides to break free from this grip. The final two stanzas show the dedication of the whole family as they learn to shun the father after his failed mission. Garland emphasizes the impact of war on not only the soldier, but on the entire family. Clearly, the power of propaganda has indoctrinated his wife and children, as he has now been abandoned and forgotten about. The final line creates a sense of sympathy for the pilot, as both options he had have resulted in a death for him. He is being controlled by propaganda and was used as a tool of the government. Perhaps the speaker doesn't agree with this pressure her father was put under and uses this final line to criticize the physical and psychological impacts of war. So let's tie this all together. When writing analytically about this poem, it is imperative that you consider the poet's attitudes. Garland tells the story of a kamikaze pilot, a story that was probably much more common than we would expect. She highlights the fact that there are many people that are impacted by war and the significance of making difficult choices. Garland chooses to end her poem with the word die, which could create a sense of futility and inevitable fate. The soldier was fated to die one way or another. We are forced to reflect on our own mortality as Garland encourages us to enjoy the beauty and majesty of nature and life. Perhaps Garland also emphasizes that conflict and patriotism denies humanity the enjoyment of life and nature. There are many different themes used within Kamikaze, and Garland uses them all effectively to highlight the power of nature as well as the effects of conflict, not only on soldiers but on their families too. I will leave you with the many themes that feature in Kamikaze and the many different poems you could compare this to. As you will see from this grid, Poppies features prominently and is perhaps a good poem for you to compare Kamikaze to, so get revising. Thank you all for listening. Make sure you bring in your flashcards or revision sheets ready for your quiz.